What makes for a good sequel? Some might say that a sequel should build upon the foundation laid by the original, taking the concepts and mechanics that were well perceived and fleshing them out to make them better. Others may have loved the original so much that they're really just looking for more of that very same thing. And some games are so perfect in their original form that a sequel can't possibly live up to the hype. I somehow feel like Dead Space 2 is a conglomeration of these three ideologies. Dead Space is one of the most prominent franchises in the survival horror genre, so much so that the original got a remake earlier this year. The original in 2008 took inspiration from the Resident Evil and Alien franchises and made one of the most butt-puckering sci-fi experiences to date. It was released to critical acclaim and accumulated over 1 million sales. This may be a hot take, but I think Dead Space did Resident Evil better than Resident Evil, and that's why it's my favorite game in the entire genre. So it was a no-brainer to make a sequel. But the question is, how do you follow up a game that so perfectly encapsulates what it's like to be stranded in space on a broken down ship while simultaneously being stalked by some sort of alien species? Some would say just give us more. And that's exactly what Visceral Games gave us. Well, almost, but we'll get to that later. Dead Space 2 continues the saga of Isaac Clarke, once again stranded on a ship, fighting the Necromorphs and desperately trying to survive long enough to escape. The gameplay feels exactly how you remember, with Isaac's health and energy being displayed on his suit, ammo showing on the weapons themselves, and no visible HUD whatsoever. This is such an important aspect of immersing you into the world and making you forget that you're just playing a video game. You still have your "Where do I go" button, which saved me from getting lost countless times, kinesis to move objects, and stasis, which slows enemies and objects for a short period of time. You still need to check every nook and cranny, break every box, and stomp every fallen necromorph to find enough ammo and heals to survive. You still collect nodes for upgrades, and have a full display of the upgrades available so you can plan out how you want to use them. There's still the same zero-G areas Isaac can float around, and vacuum areas where you have limited oxygen that you can refill at O2 canisters. Everything feels so familiar. There were some gameplay additions though, most notably a new hacking minigame Isaac will need to complete to open certain devices or doors. Isaac is also now voiced, which was a change from the original 2008 version, but not new if you played the 2024 remake. Overall, they took a package that was incredibly well received, made minor changes and improvements, and gave us more of it. This resulted in more critical acclaim, with Dead Space 2 shipping nearly 2 million units in its first week, doubling the sales of the original. It ultimately sold 4 million units. But with higher production costs than its predecessor, it was actually considered a commercial failure. So with all of that out of the way, it's clear that people love Dead Space 2. This was my first time ever playing it, and I genuinely loved it too, but I do still think the original was better. This may be more of a feeling than something I can factually prove, but the sequel just felt more action-based, and took some of the blood-running cold moments out of the experience. When I talked about how much I loved Dead Space, most people told me I needed to play Resident Evil 4. I mean, that was the inspiration for Dead Space, it had to be great, right? Well, I played it, and I enjoyed it, but there were just so many enemies that I never felt scared of what was around the corner. I was too busy mowing people down to really take in the atmosphere, to immerse myself in the world and really feel like I was actually the one there trying to survive. And I had a similar feeling with Dead Space 2, admittedly to a lesser degree. There were moments I got that chill down my spine and my butt cheeks were clenched, but it was far less often than in the original. I haven't played Dead Space 3 yet, but I heard tons of people saying that it was basically just an action game, almost entirely abandoning the horror element. If that is the case, then Dead Space 2 was a stepping stone that led to it. My guess is that they leaned into the action, saw the sequel double in sales, and then really hit it home to end the trilogy. That's just speculation though. We can circle back to that after I play it for the first time. I genuinely feel that the original Dead Space and remake were perfectly focused on creating tension through the atmosphere, dim lighting, music, and environmental storytelling. It felt like every single facet reminded you that you're alone in the middle of space, with no one to rely on but yourself. While the sequel had a few additional characters which resulted in you literally not being alone, I don't think that's why it seems to lack that feel. A criticism I've read online is that the sequel relies more on jump scares than the slow burning suspense of the original. but I didn't come to that conclusion on my own either. I've attributed it to the feeling of more enemies to fight throughout the game. The more you see the Necromorphs, the less scary they become. But that's just a feeling. As I alluded to earlier, maybe it's just a result of the original doing it so perfectly that Dead Space 2 wasn't gonna hit the same no matter how well it was done. I don't have all the answers, but I just felt like the sequel lost some of the magic that I found while playing the Dead Space remake earlier this year. With that being said, I really liked where Visceral Games took the story. Dead Space 2 takes place 3 years after the events of Dead Space. Isaac wakes up on the Sprawl, a space station built by the Earth government to continue the marker experiments from Aegis 7. Isaac is freed from the asylum by a man who is immediately killed, resulting in Isaac running for his life. We learn that Isaac was captured so that the unitologists could remake the marker using the data in Isaac's mind. They also needed to use memory blockers to avoid that data from destroying Isaac's mind. The marker is giving Isaac dementia, resulting in visions of Nicole. In Dead Space, Isaac is trying to find and save Nicole, seeing visions of her from the marker. In Dead Space 2, Isaac knows Nicole is dead, and the marker is trying to get Isaac to do its bidding by manifesting visions in the form of Nicole. Isaac's hallucinations give us a sense of unknowing. What is real, and what is a result of Isaac's loss of sanity? Who is here to help Isaac, and who's just here to use him to help the marker get what it wants? We run into another survivor, Strauss, whose mental state is far worse than Isaac's, so much so that he ends up attacking our only ally on the Sprawl, Ellie. That's gonna leave a mark. And eventually he attacks us, forcing us to kill him in self-defense. Should have done that way earlier. We get to revisit the Ishimura, which was nice to see again. Hallucinations of Nicole guide us to the government sector, where we jump into some sort of machine to unlock the marker data in our mind, kill the man in charge of this operation, Tideman, and have one last boss battle against the hallucination of Nicole to avoid being absorbed by the marker. Once we destroy the marker, Isaac sits down waiting to die. However, Ellie flies back in to save us. We tricked her into an escape pod earlier to try and save her, but she returned the favor and gets Isaac out alive. After the credits roll, we get one last transmission that the marker site is a total loss, but there are other sites to pick up the pieces. This sets up for the final entry in the series, and really has me interested in how it all ends. Isaac's mental stability has been getting worse and worse. What kind of state will he be in for the finale? How is he going to handle multiple different marker sites? I'm excited to find out, regardless of how bad a reputation the final entry has received. All in all, Dead Space 2 is an imperfect sequel. It took some aspects and built upon them, such as the new hacking minigame to get into new areas, and gave us more of what we loved in the original in regards to the gameplay and combat. But I can't help but feel like this was the step towards a more combat-focused game that ignores what I loved so much about Dead Space. It's hard to put my finger on it, but a bit of the magic was lost in Dead Space 2. But even with that lost magic, I still loved my time with the sequel and can't ignore that it was a really good follow-up to a beloved first entry. While I still prefer the original, there's no denying that Dead Space 2 has a lot to offer to fans of the franchise. But that's just my take. What do you think? Was Dead Space 2 bigger and better than the original? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want to hear my thoughts on my first experience with the Dead Space franchise, click on the video on your screen now.